Hope you all enjoyed the roundtables this morning. As I've mentioned before, and will continue to mention, all the great things that are going on in the States with all the innovation and all the discussion topics. It's always a good thing to get in, and I'm very pleased to see a good turnout this morning, because it was, I think, a long night for some of us. So please make sure you follow NASCIO on social media. The State CIOs Make a Difference campaign will launch May 4th. And congratulations to our Twitter contest winners from yesterday. If your name is on the screen, please stop by the registration booth and pick up your prize. So we're going to run this again today for the quote of the day, so make sure that you get that in there and share your favorite quotes from any of the sessions today and using the NASCIO hashtag NASCIO15. I told you a little rough today. Before the general session begins, please welcome Brenda Decker to the stage. Brenda is a past president of NASCIO and is the acting chief information officer for the state of Nebraska. Brenda?
Good morning. It looks like we've got a good crowd here today. Like Stu said, I was watching people last night and kind of looked at it and went, it's going to be a light turnout in the morning. Last night's events were fabulous. I think every year we stand here and we say the NASCIO conference just keeps getting better and better, and I think that's a testament to our leadership from Stu, although I can't say that out loud. He's not here, right? But I think it really is one of those things that we need your involvement to make sure that we keep these sessions going and getting the information that you need. So I'll do my past president thing and remind you, please, please, please fill out your evaluations because they are looked at. The reason I am here this morning is we want to take a moment this morning to recognize an individual who has demonstrated outstanding leadership promoting excellence in government through information technology. Each spring, NASCIO, you've got me doing it, Stu. NASCIO's executive committee recognizes an individual who has demonstrated a clear understanding of the fundamental role that information technology can play in efficient and effective government operations. The NASCIO Technology Champion Award honors innovative leadership to promote sound information technology solutions, policies, and practices. Governor Heineman won this award 2 years ago, and it was one of those things. Governor Heineman was the governor in Nebraska. It was one of those things that meant an awful, awful lot to him, and I think our leadership in our states truly believe that NASCIO provides value, so this is a big deal. This year's award recipient is Governor John Kasich from the state of Ohio. Governor Kasich's vision and leadership are integral to the success of multiple information technology projects in Ohio, and he was nominated by one of the individuals from the state of Ohio, not Stu, and the nominator wrote, Stu, it would have been a good thing for you to have done that. He wrote, "He understands the critical nature of technology in delivering services to citizens and businesses and the importance of technology in supporting education and developing Ohio's future leaders." Governor Kasich was unable to join us today, but he has recorded a short message for us.
I'm honored to receive the 2015 Technology Champion Award. Really sorry I can't be to accept the honor in person. Technology has been an integral part of what we're doing in Ohio. We need to be able to serve Ohioans. To do that, we need to constantly innovate, upgrade, and streamline our technologies. First thing we did was expand the capacity of Ohio's Academic Resources Network to increase capacity for medical research, higher education, manufacturing, and Ohio's medical corridor. It's the crucial link between creating new businesses and next generation innovation. Job creators were not going to move their businesses to Ohio if we couldn't provide them the tools to successfully run their businesses. So we set up a 100 gig, nearly 2,000-mile statewide fiber optic backbone connecting 10 major cities and making Ohio a leader in high-speed technology. You know, we actually didn't do it. We didn't start it. There was a great person that worked in the government that came up with this, but we're obviously advancing this process. When we were in the process of upgrading our network, we identified opportunities for consolidation that could benefit all state agencies. We're still in the process of upgrading our network, but those upgrades will save money and increase service capability, quality, and security. The consolidation also helps the public by providing infrastructure to underserved communities as well as public safety through first responder communication network upgrades and expansion. The final piece of the puzzle is our IT optimization initiative. We want to lower the state's total IT costs and redirect those savings into improved services and programs that benefit Ohio citizens and businesses. To date, we think we've saved over $75 million. We have a lot more to do, but I'm committed to making Ohio the most forward-thinking state in high-speed technology. Thank you for choosing me, your 2015 Technology Champion, and great wishes for a great event.
I think when you think of the word passionate about technology, I think we just saw it. Stu Davis, will you please accept the award on the governor's behalf? Please join me in honoring Governor Kasich's receipt. You don't get that back to Ohio, you're in trouble.
Well, I'm pleased to accept this on behalf of the governor. I'm going to set this down, actually, because I get myself in trouble. But the one thing, you know, that the governor mentioned is the $75 million. That's actually, from our tracking right now, it's really upwards of 85, but following Alex Pettit and, you know, setting those expectations low is kind of what we were trying to hope for. So hopefully I can over-deliver on that one. The thing about Governor Kasich, if you think about it, we tried consolidation in the previous 4 administrations, about 14 years of trying to get IT optimization, consolidation moving. And in the 4 years he's been there, he's really moved that. And like I said, $75 million at least in this fiscal year, $54 million in the previous year. So he's really making a big difference. He says what he means, and he means what he says. And that passion comes out in every meeting I've been in with him, and sometimes it's a finger being pointed at my chest. So he keeps me on my toes. But thank you very much. Let's see how that goes. So Brenda's served on the task force that reviewed nominations for this award and has been an incredibly valuable asset to NASCIO over the years, and we appreciate her service and all of those things. And since I'm following right into our next session, I'm handing that award off to Brenda so I don't drop it and for safekeeping. But please help me thank Brenda for her longtime service and her work. So before I introduce the general session speakers, I have a quick question, and this question is for everyone. So grab your ARS pads. Do you think most government IT environments will become more centralized or more distributed by 2020? More centralized, more distributed, stay about the same? I just don't know. I was talking about this. These 10 seconds to you guys probably don't seem like much, but they're like an evening when you're standing up here. Yeah, I tell you, you know, those dollars that we're saving in Ohio, that's all IT operations, that's all infrastructure consolidation, really. And you think about that with 26 different agencies and that consolidation, I don't know how it would ever be unraveled. I think Steve Nichols, who's one of our session folks for the next session, is really right. I mean, it's just too costly to try to unravel that centralization. I don't think you'll see it, so I think that's probably dead on. We have 2 thought-provoking general sessions this morning, both of which will speak right to the year's conference theme, Are You Ready for Disruptive Change? The first session, Forces of Change, Addressing Policy Challenges, will discuss what can be done to resolve conflicts between governmental policy and new and disruptive technologies and business solutions. Please welcome discussion facilitator Dugan Pettit, MEO coordinator at the Center for Digital Government. And our panelists include Robin Bond with Cloud Computing Technical Program Manager at NIST at NIST, Steve Emanuel, Chief Information Officer for the State of New Jersey, Steve Nichols, Chief Technology Officer for the State of Georgia, and Michael D'Angelo, Deputy Chief Information Officer for the State of Washington. Please join the stage.
So in 2013, the McKinsey Institute issued a report, Disruptive Technologies, Advances that Will Transform Life, Business, and the Global Economy. They identified 10 technologies that will have a profound impact on globally by 2025. The top 5 technologies should come as no surprise to any of us in this room. Mobile internet, automation of knowledge work, the Internet of Things, cloud technologies, and advanced robotics. McKinsey estimates that those will save between $14 trillion and $34.4 trillion annually. At least the economic impact globally will be of that amount. So those top 4 have either already shown up in state governments or are about to show up. And this really creates and has been creating a wave of technology that has impacts and tremendous benefits to the citizens and to our states. But also, what comes along with these transformative technologies are serious impacts and challenges to policies and practices that have really been based and predicated on different operating models than what these now provide. The challenge for all of us in this room is not only to implement, fund, and plan these technologies, but it's also to create the policy environment that allows us to really benefit from those technologies. When we look at our policies, they're there in many cases to do guidance, to help us be successful, but written in some cases around an old way of doing business. And in other cases, the policies are there for darn good reason, to provide accountability to the public, to provide oversight to the public, but yet they don't work with some of the new technologies that we're bringing into place. Not only don't they work, but in some cases, we really can't even get out of the starting gates unless we begin to adjust those technologies. So the challenges for CIOs really is not just the implementation of the technology, but it's also working across the enterprise with the policy owners to help understand what these technologies can do and how to adjust the policies and practices to allow us to be really effective in the implementation and get the benefits out of these technologies that they promise. It's not a new challenge. All of you have been dealing with this already. From the beginning, we're migrating from a first wave of technologies and legacy systems to a second wave of technologies, and yet there's a third wave that's out there with the Internet of Things that's right around the corner, with new challenges that we don't even contemplate. So today we're going to talk amongst this great group of policymakers, as well as some experts in the room, about what are these technologies that are driving change, what are the policy impacts, where's the collision, where's the conflict, what are some of the things that we can do about it, and then finally, we're going to follow up with a prediction from our panelists about what we'll be talking about in 5 years here with respect to these same issues. So with that, let me get started with the first question. And I'm going to start with Steve Emanuel. Steve, what are you doing in New Jersey where you've had impacts with policies and adopting technologies in a way that you've learned about what are some things that can be done? How can we address some of these challenges where we're implementing policies?
Well, certainly, the state of New Jersey is a lot like many of my colleagues out here. there's places where we're trying to catch up with you, and there's places that we're trying to set some first-of-a-kinds as we move forward with technology and implementation and the resulting policy issues that come along with it. So for the last year, state of New Jersey has been migrating to Office 365, so we're doing our first full client cloud migration, which I think is really good. So we're catching up with many of you on that, and it's been an experience trying to figure out some of the challenges that we would have in moving to the cloud. But also, with first of a kind, state of New Jersey, I'm very pleased to be a partner with the Office of Homeland Security for our broadband project. We've created JerseyNet, and FirstNet has asked the state of New Jersey to put together a proof of concept on deployable broadband technologies. So this is something that we hadn't thought of initially. We think that it makes sense. You know, you never know where crises are going to hit. So in partnering with the NTIA and their idea of putting this forward to FirstNet, we believe that in the next month or two, we're going to actually have our first deployable out in one of the locations that we've selected. We have 3 locations in the state of New Jersey that we plan on putting broadband on this deployable unit. Two of them are actually going to border other states, so we're hoping to partner with other states on this. And it's going to create some very interesting dialogues about how we're going to use it, how it's going to be deployed, making sure that our key learning objectives are tested very well. But it's not just about the technologies. It really is about changing, you know, the governance structure on how we look at and deploy new technologies. So one of the things that I think that really was pressing for the state of New Jersey was how can we really change how technology selections are made, and can we get IT out of the lead role in some cases and really put business back into that? And that's one of the areas that we actually did explore this year. And we've made some active progress with one of our domains to actually talk about pushing technology decisions and discipleship into the agencies so that they can come up with the business plan, the business directive. So we're basically kind of the validation points as opposed to the leaders in this. So I think it's really been a good combination of the implementation of technology and really focusing on some governance.
Well, thank you, Steve. Let's get you involved here. We've got an ARS question for state CIOs here. What changes driven by technologies create the most challenges to statewide policies in your state? Big data, Internet of Things, mobility, public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud, others. And the winner is public cloud, anything as a service, by not just a little bit. So, Michael D'Angelo, let's get your perspective on this from technology-driven business change. How are these disruptive business practices or technologies challenging policies in Washington? And specifically, I know you're doing some stuff in anything as a service right now in the public cloud, so you are a great test case to answer this question.
Yeah, I would have voted public cloud as well.
Yeah.
So I was happy to see that.
You can vote next time.
Okay. I mean, I've been driving the public cloud initiative within the state of Washington. It's been a lot of fun. I've discovered problems I never realized existed. From a policy perspective, what's come up is, there's issues around just our own existing policies and changing our security standards or updating those, and changing how we procure through public cloud services. We have this sort of mindset that we're purchasing assets normally, but now it's really about the service, and so it requires different policy around procurement. Cloud and really the consumerization that enables is driven policy changes or at least considerations around ethics rules and whether employees can have mobile devices and access cloud services using the company Wi-Fi, and so it kind of raises tons of policy questions. The one that's been kind of the most fascinating, and for me, and when I say fascinating, I mean irritating, is the fact that as a state we made a larger investment in a data center somewhat recently, and by the time we made that decision and actually the data center became in place, technology shifted twice. There were 2 major shifts, 2 major pivots. I mean, the first one was the virtualization, and then the second one being largely cloud services. And what that's resulted in as a state, and I'm sure other states are seeing the same thing, is this massive reduction in footprint. But we have this large investment, and essentially it became real before we were able to realize real value of that asset, at least the maximum value of that asset. And it's a problem for us because we have a mandate to consolidate all of our data centers into one and essentially fill up, quote, the data center. And it's an issue of optics for the legislature because they've chose to, fund this sort of project, and our data center is not even half full. And at best case, it might be half full. But the policy question here is around the consolidation. And we've had this requirement or expectations that agencies move their existing data centers into the state data center. But now that just doesn't make good business sense anymore. So we're making a shift in our policy direction for the enterprise, which is instead of the rhetoric being you need to move into the state data center, the rhetoric is now you need to get out of the data center business, get out of your data center and move to the cloud or move to the state data center. So that's the right business decision. It still creates a major optics issue for the legislature, and we still struggle with that actually as a state.
Yeah, it always seems to me that the timing of that decision was just at a really dangerous time in the whole development of the cloud when the data center bill passed in Washington. If it had been a year earlier, you probably would have been in a more conventional data center structure. If it had been a year later, you may not have had a data center built, would be my guess. If that decision were made today in Washington State, do you think you would have moved into a public cloud environment completely? Or?
If we had to make that decision today, I think it'd be really hard pressed to justify a brand new data center facility. We did have a sense of urgency about the decision because we had a state data center that needed some major physical investments. It just wasn't able to support the capacity it had, and so there was a sense of urgency about solving this problem, but really the only solution that was readily available, or at least the mainstream solution at the time, was to build a data center. Today, I think it'd be hard pressed to do it. And we certainly weren't the only ones. I mean, this isn't just a government problem. I think there's private companies that have had the same issue. So it was a bad case of timing and for us.
So Steve, let me follow up on this question of state data centers with you. Is there a policy question evolving, at least from the CIO's office, about do you stay in the data center or move out? I mean, if we turn this policy into the policies controlled by the state CIO, is that on the horizon?
Yeah, and we've evolved our standards around that a couple of times. I mean, so we already have a consolidated data center, so we got started a couple years earlier than Washington State. So now it's a challenge when people come up for rebid or replatform, whether to require them to stay in the data center or allow them to go out to cloud. So had I been voting, I would have also picked public cloud as kind of the most disruptive. The other thing I guess that I'm seeing is, because we've been talking about cloud at every NASCIO since 2011, so we have a pretty good understanding of all the problems around security and data ownership and that kind of thing. So, as I was kind of telling you guys earlier, like with what we know now, we would have been killing it in 2012 if we were doing a procurement back then. Yeah. But 2015, what's happened is cloud has disrupted all the other industries as well. So what I'm seeing is my procurement agency calling me up on, it seems like a weekly basis, with non-technology procurements saying, hey, we're going out for a pharmacy benefits program, or we're going out for fleet management, and they're bidding a cloud solution for their back office IT, and it looks like the data might be sensitive. What should we do? And so all of a sudden we're getting pulled, the technology agency, into procurements that we would have ignored in past years that now suddenly have a cloud component that we have to ask about.
So isn't there a policy issue here about setting guidance about this? And I know you've got a fairly developed approach to how you decide what applications go in the private cloud, what applications don't. But what are the implications for that policy development? And how do you bring those business owners in who maybe just want to completely go out?
So kind of answering the first question first around the policy implications, where we've landed is mainly it's around the sensitivity of the data. So if you've got HIPAA data, CGIS data, IRS data, whether you can kind of get a pass from your regulators to go to the cloud or not, we have sort of a higher level of due diligence around that, and generally say no, you have to stay in the state data center. But if you have something where the confidentiality, integrity, availability requirements are sort of a FISMA low sort of set of standards, we've evolved from a mother may I approach where the agencies have to come and ask permission to a sort of a proactive policy that says you can go to cloud, you just need to give us 30 days notice so we can just keep up with where all the cloud workloads have gone to.
So it sounds like one of the barriers to moving to the cloud, completely to the cloud, are federal partner requirements like the IRS audits that they're going to keep us operating an on-premise data center, at least for the foreseeable future?
Absolutely. When you dig into those requirements, sometimes they're very prescriptive about how some of the security controls are implemented, like getting down to the level of telling you what kind of encryption algorithm, and often they have a lot of requirements around background checks that just candidly, unless it's some kind of a private cloud situation, it just breaks the business model for all the suppliers that are out there, selling a cookie-cutter cloud solution.
Okay, so,
But,
so
you know, if I can
go ahead,
respond to
Michael.
that. Yeah, I think that's certainly the current reality. I do believe that these federal regulators are also looking at ways to leverage the cloud more and try to be more cloud friendly. At least that's some of what I'm encountering in reading and talking to some of these individuals. So do you think that's going to actually continue that way, or do you eventually see where the regulations are going to be such that you can move essentially any workload into the cloud, even the highly...
I think that because there's a cost, that what's going to happen is a few of the suppliers are going to decide it's in their best interest to comply, and we're going to have a set of cloud providers that can comply. That'll be a pretty small subset of the industry who are going to basically get on board with those requirements, that they're going to meet the regulators halfway.
Yeah.
So, so I want to get to another ARS question, but before I do, Robert, let me come over to you, and I think this is really an unfair question because this isn't NIST's domain, but I mean, if you look down the pike with your counterparts in the federal government, I mean, how far away is there at least an opportunity that we're going to start seeing a little bit of a different thought process from our federal partners around this question of the specialized IRS audits or the CJIS audits by the Department of Justice?
I see. So in early 2011, the U.S. CIO put out a document on cloud first policy, and in it said when you're about to do a new procurement, software procurement, whatever, you should start looking at the cloud as a first option. So what they did in the document is they put together a framework for select, provision, and manage the service, right? So I guess the earlier speaker mentioned about how we're going from getting big iron to actually getting services, right? Assets to services transition. So in the Cloud First policy document, it just sets out a framework, but then it allows each agency to play within the framework. So everybody can do what suits them best, but we have a generic type of overall system that we should ensure stays put. For example, the security issues. I was talking earlier, and I found out a lot of people are using NIST 853 and the FISMA stuff. So so now what we're doing along with the GSA and this FedRAMP program, right, is to help to certify providers based on can they meet 80% of a security, so you have your security requirements, right. FedRAMP will hit about 80% of them, and then you will specify the 20%.
But for the time being, at least, IRS is still pretty much in the same place on wanting to be on premise for auditing of data centers. I mean, that's probably not a NIST issue, but I mean, do you have any reason to think that they're going to change that soon, or?
No, because I think actually at any opportunity, at any time, anybody is anybody has an opportunity to be visited by forensics experts to, there's something bad or nefarious going on in the cloud. Not that you did it, but some user did it, and you can expect the Department of Justice or whoever to take out servers at any time. So
still a barrier then.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to our second ARS question. What policies, now we want to get to the question, we've talked about technologies, but now we want to talk about the collision with policies. Where are the greatest barriers to achieving benefits offered through new technology-driven opportunities? What policies are they? Are they audit? Are they budget? Are they finance? Are they human relations? Are they procurement? Are they security? Or is it something else? So vote now. Yes.
We had a little bet.
Well, it's clear somebody won something on this. So we want to talk about procurement. Security we've talked a little bit about, and I also want to come back, and I'm probably going to lead with budget. But before I lead into the whole budget and finance question on policy, because in my view that's a little bit of the starting blocks that we have to get out of here. I want to come back on this audit question to Robert. The NIST cloud roadmap and the reference architecture really talk about an audit role, and they also talk about, I think, procurement to some degree. At least there's some procurement contemplated in that. So can you give us some kind of perspective on what the architecture and what the roadmap talk about in terms of the third-party audits and audits in general?
Sure. So there's actually two pieces. So there's a there's a cloud computing reference architecture that we developed at NIST, which is technology neutral, and it uses an actor role type of description. So instead of saying how to build a cloud, what does a cloud need? So we described it in an actor basis, meaning a provider, a customer, a cloud broker, a carrier, and a cloud auditor. So in this role, the cloud auditor is key for maintaining a check on the vendor to ensure that what he said he's selling you, you actually have a third party that can verify that. In addition, I was mentioning before that even if you're a cloud provider or you set up your own cloud, you want to have your own set of internal checks and internal auditing too to ensure that you're getting the right efficiencies out of your cloud as well. So.
Okay, all right.
I'm sorry. So as far as procurement, the procurement issue, that's handled a lot by our General Services Administration. However, NIST and Department of Homeland Security, we're all pretty tight, so we're all play together on that. GSA is continuing to work on their procurement, and they're trying to do something along the line of some cloud metrics, but we can talk about that later.
Yeah, that'd be good to come back to, because I think that provides some help in breaking through some of these practice issues and getting a better solution. We're fortunate today to have a room full of experts, but in the question of budget, probably more budget than finance, if you have a new technology that can't even get into the budget process because the budget process favors capital expenditures versus operating expenditures, you don't even get the technologies in the starting blocks. And if you do get them in the starting blocks, do you have a way of getting funding when you're moving from a legacy system that has a cost model around it and a cost stream on it to another platform, a cloud platform, that also has a subscription base that for some period of time are going to overlap? How do you make that work within the funding models? So that's a big challenge and a barrier. And to some degree, it's maybe not fair to say it is a policy that hasn't adjusted in how we do the budget. But I wanted to ask Scott Pattison, who is with us. Scott is the Executive Director of the National Association of Budget Officers. He's been a friend of NASPO and NASCIO for years, and he's well known by most of you. So Scott, could you stand up and give us some perspective here? First off, is there a bias built into the budget for one-time capital expenditures versus operating expenditures? I mean, I've worked in 2 states, and every time I've had a budget that's wanted to increase my operating budget, it's not flown well. And so that's part of the issue here. And I'm curious, what advice you have or what perspective you can provide from your knowledge of what other states are doing on that question.
Yeah, well, sure. I have a couple of comments. One is, I think that I'm very grateful that procurement beat budgeting. But a couple of things. Operating budgets are really, really tight. And we just finished meeting the budget officers in Austin on Friday, and Ida and I are saying for very few states. So you have to accept that. Yes, unfortunately, I hate to admit it, capital is favored. And it's because if you issue bonds and you are getting the money from the debt of the bonds, the interest from the operating budget is you're getting a lot for a very small amount of money. So you have to start with that. I have a few tips. One is that the typical thing of being patient and consistent over time, because you have to educate not only the top elected officials, but you have to educate the budget.
Scott, let me interrupt you just for a second. I'm sorry. Can you hear Scott in the back room? Is your mic? Yeah, come on up. Come on up, Scott. I'm sorry. I thought you had a mic there.
No, sorry, and I'll be brief, but we just had a meeting of the budget officers in Austin, Texas, and we just found that almost every single state has a tight operating budget for a lot of reasons. So I have several comments. Yes, capital is favored. I like to use this example. During bad times, universities get a lot of buildings because you can issue bonds. From the operating budget, the amount of money for interest is very small, and yet from the operating budget, they need a lot of money for the maintenance and to furnish the buildings and so forth, and that doesn't exist. So you have kind of this dichotomy and problem that you all face also. So I have a few quick tips. One is to be very patient and consistent in terms of providing information and educating the not only elected officials, but the finance and budget officials of the benefits of the cloud, understanding the cloud, and why, from a policy perspective, it's important for the state to move in a particular direction. The other thing is, be patient in the sense that you may not get approval right away, but I think over time it will start to happen. It takes a while to educate the finance and budget people. Another thing is, you have to assist the budget folks in being creative, and what I mean by that is you may need to push for, every state has different laws, but creative ways to look at the definition of capital finance. I think a lot of budget officers are starting to realize that that needs to change anyway. And then the final thing I'll say is think about how contracts are written. Are there ways to phase in funding, spread it out over fiscal years? These sound simple, but to the extent you you can assist budget folks in your proposals to do that type of thing will help a lot.
So, not so fast.
Oh, okay.
So, in the overlapping cost streams, and that's just a question of trying to make your case in the budget process and create and getting some forbearance that for a couple of years we have a funding model that's going to look pretty darn bloated, but it will come down. Is it just the planning documents?
Well, to some extent, let me give you a couple of comments on that real quick. One is that overlapping issue is a problem, obviously, because budgets are tight. And remember, and you have to always remember this, you're competing against everybody else, whether it's the prison system or whoever, and they're saying the same thing. You spend more now, you're saving money later. And I think to the extent that you can figure out with the IT folks as to how to deal, with the budget folks, as how they can deal with IT, at least in the short term, by either spreading things out or giving them huge confidence that you really are going to see some savings in the future. You may have to do something drastic that almost no other state agency does, which accept and convince the budget folks and the appropriators that you should get some upfront monies for the next 2 to 3 years because it's worth it, it's important because of that overlapping issue, right. And you may take a cut to your budget 3 years from now. Something fairly dramatic to kind of deal with that issue.
Very good. I have one more question for you, and then I want to, at least since we have you here, Scott, give the audience an opportunity to ask any questions at this point. So that's kind of a clue to the back of the room that we might need mics moving around if somebody has questions. So, Scott, what are state budget officers seeing in the way of technologies and new business processes and new business models that are creating challenges for them? I mean, it's not just the CIO that gets these challenges, but what's out there that's challenging the budget officers?
You know, I'm glad you asked that, Dugan, because I think you can all help the budget and finance folks at your state to deal with this major problem for them, and that's uncertainty as to where they get the value for the money they put into IT. I think, and we even heard it on Friday at my meeting with the budget officers in Austin, they're not confident where they should be appropriating and suggesting and recommending where money goes. They need to know, does it go to cybersecurity? And if it does, is it really going to do some good? They know they can't prevent all hacking, but can they at least prevent more than exists now? Can they get value for putting money into the cloud and really, truly saving some money? So I think the conflict comes in their hesitation and caution. They're really tight on their money, particularly on the operating side. And they need you all to really make the case, convince them, and give them confidence that where you are recommending certain money goes really is going to make a difference, whether it's in cybersecurity, the cloud, or elsewhere.
Very good. So before we let Scott go, are there any questions out in the audience that you would like to ask Scott as a circuit budget officer, or any suggestions for him to carry back to your budget officer? Well,
I've got a question nobody else does.
Go ahead, Michael.
This conversation or a question around the cost of IT and the value it brings, the thought that sort of triggers in my head is that we're often asking the wrong question, which is the technology exists to solve some sort of business problem. And so this concept of, this is an IT project or an IT investment, the reality is it isn't. It's a business investment. And sometimes when I get that question around, well, we need to reduce the cost of IT, that's actually pretty simple. We can get rid of all of IT, make it zero. The problem is, of course, that's not viable as a business. And the reason is because the technology is a major enabler. So I think to some extent, we actually are our own worst enemies to talk about IT as something separate from the business, as opposed to it's really a business cost. And you can use technology to lower the overall cost of delivering your services. So from a budgeting perspective, how much of that is really brought into the conversation, sort of the realization that it's not about reducing the cost of IT, but it's rather about using IT to reduce the costs?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I think you need to ask yourselves, are you asking those particular questions of what the priorities are of the budget people? And again, those are going to reflect the priorities of the elected official, particularly the governor. And so I think, I had this situation just the other day. I was talking to some budget officers, and I said, in IT, what's your highest priority? And a couple of them said, we are terrified that we haven't put enough money into cybersecurity because we don't want the governor embarrassed if there is some type of hacking. I know you share that, so I think asking that type of question of a budget person during the appropriations and budgeting process is so huge, because then that's a priority. But there are other states, for example, and I can name a bunch of them, but North Carolina's one, Indiana, Colorado, they're doing some really aggressive activities to try to make government processes more efficient. So that's another thing to come in, because that's a governor's priority. How can you assist? Because I think you all have moved beyond IT just as IT, but I'm not sure all the finance people have. And I think you can help do that, where you can say, what do you need? What are your priorities as you put this budget together, and where are you going to spend money, and how can we help? Do you want us to really focus on cybersecurity? Or you're talking about efficiency in government. Where can we put money to help you that way? So I think you can make a real difference.
Very good. Questions for Scott before we let him go and move on into another area? Well, Scott, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Let's give Scott a hand. So this is a great paper that all of you have probably seen and looked at. It's a 2014 Charting the Course CIO study that NASCIO has done. And in the middle of it, there's a section on sourcing. And much to my surprise, when I looked at this section, I'm kind of used to seeing metrics that say CIOs are very pessimistic about sourcing of IT products. But something changed in this document, and it actually said CIOs displayed a moderate level of confidence in the ability of their state procurement entities and processes to effectively procure and contract for managed services. Those who have been most successful have either implemented procurement reforms or had their in-house ability to procure or have institutionalized acquisitions process specifically for managed services. So there's really some good news in here, and that is that there are more effective processes taking place to procure these IT services. Doesn't mean that we're there yet. The cycle times are still far too long. But I'd like to follow up with, to start with you, Steve Nichols. What's causing this? From your perspective, where's the improvement?
So I think that there's not one single thing across the country. If you were to sort of poll all the state members here, I think it's everyone is sort of recognizing they need to just sort of take it into their own hands and do what they can. So I know in Georgia, one thing we've started to do for our really large procurements, like say anything more than about $10 or $20 million, is taking an iterative approach in our procurements where we'll start with sort of a request for qualified contractors to down select a manageable number, like maybe 3 to 5 bidders, and then kind of bring them into the procurement tent with them, give them the RFP. So, it starts out the same as any other RFP. They give us back a draft response. We give them some feedback on it, and then we tune up the RFPs, the stuff that maybe we didn't communicate well or that's confusing. Also giving the bidders some coaching on where we think they missed the mark. And we'll actually repeat that 3 times. So they'll get 3 chances to, a response and then 2 amended responses, and we'll have revised the RFP with feedback from the bidders 3 times by the time we're done. It's a pretty heavy process for the people that go all the way through. There's a couple of corporate members, out here who've been on the receiving end of that, and they'll tell you that because part of this is we'll bring them into the room with us for a day, like one at a time.
Right.
So like they'll have to bring their entire bid team down to Georgia and sit with us for a day to kind of get the feedback. We do all this verbally. So from a travel point of view, it's a pretty expensive bid process, but we think it leads to a lot better results. We think it also just cuts out all the noise around any kind of protest, because by the time you get to the end, no one thinks they're shenanigans. They're just exhausted and they're just glad to get to an award, but we feel like it really cuts out, the change requests and misunderstandings later to go through that really lengthy iterative process. So that would be like a for example of how we're trying to innovate in the procurement process inside the rules of procurement.
I know California, I don't know if Carlos is in the room, and I'm not going to call you up if you are, Carlos, but California did something similar as they looked at their major IT acquisitions, where a few years ago I had a chance to look at some of their work, and they were bringing a short list into the room after they did the initial shortlisting and spending a lot of time with them, making sure that they understood the requirements clearly, had good communication and feedback to get a better product out of the RFP. And then I'm also heartened to see that their cycle times, at least when they awarded CalCloud, were down to pretty fast track. I think it was 9 months, which was pretty good for that undertaking. We've got another expert in the room. Bill Burns, would you stand up for a minute here? So Bill Burns is with us today. Some of you who are on the NASCIO IT Procurement Committee may have heard Bill's voice, or if you were in Alex Pettit's session yesterday, you heard Bill basically fielding all the hardball questions that Alex could find, and did a great job with that, Bill.
It was murder.
Yeah. So Bill is the purchasing director with the state of Idaho. Bill came to Idaho, I think, 8 years ago after 25 years with HP managing within the supply chain. It's really been my pleasure to talk about IT procurement and approaches with Bill, because he clearly gets it, and he's contributing, I think, within NASPO to help move procurement to be effective in dealing with technology acquisition. So we're really happy to have you here, Bill. I'm hoping your mic will work, but I have a
Testing.
Yeah, good. I have a couple of questions for you. First off, there's a perception, at least with the CIOs in the survey, that there's some improvement here. So from your perspective, looking across the NASCIO landscape, what are some of the things that have changed that are getting better outcomes in IT procurement?
Well, thank you. I appreciate being here and appreciate representing NASPO at this event. And I'm representing some of the ideas that came across from our state partners in regard to IT and cloud procurement. One of the just to let you know where the focus is of NASPO, 2 of the 10 top focus items on NASPO's list are related to IT, whether it's just IT development or cloud procurement. And so it's heavy on the focus list for all the organizations. When you talk to the folks at the state level, the major problems they have right now are, 1, understanding where IT is going, what the picture is, the policies, and the focus. Another thing in cloud procurement is our terms and conditions, understanding that normal procurement processes and our standard terms and conditions don't work in a rapidly changing IT environment. So on the first note, what I think is happening where we might be seeing some improvement is IT and procurement are working as collective teams. When you look at the CalCloud example, the thing that stands out a lot in that process of being able to actually integrate supplier conversations into the process and also have a quicker procurement process related to the collaboration between IT and procurement. Getting them on board to understand what your objectives are, where you're going, what kind of contracting vehicles you need, and if those vehicles can recognize not only the procurement you're trying to do currently, but the procurements for unknown things that you need for the future. So that collaboration between IT and the procurement organizations is essential. Instead of one of the comments that we received back was related to not understanding, the states are getting barraged by one-off type IT contracts that are required by your states. Understanding more of the strategy and where you're going, I think the vehicles, contracting vehicles can be laid out much more to add for flexibility to not only procure what you're trying to procure currently, but to actually have the capability to add other service products onto those contracts over the future. So understanding that landscape, working collaboratively with the IT groups is essential. As far as terms and conditions are concerned.
Bill, can I stop you there just for a minute? Steve, you were talking about, yesterday we were having this conversation about not so much acquiring the big cloud, but the business-related cloud applications that are coming in, whether it's facilities system or a fleet management system, that they all have an element of cloud. And Bill just talked about that from his perspective. What are you seeing in Georgia on this?
Yeah, so kind of the earlier comment I'd made about while we were busy trying to figure out how to procure pure cloud, it was off disrupting all the other industries. It's really just sort of showing up in all kinds of line of business applications. And you know, that's the policy challenge for us, is trying to figure out how heavy-handed to be about trying to prescribe, you know, what's really a cutout, you know, a vendor standing behind a vendor that we're going to procure around just how prescriptive we want to be around how they're going to manage things like data security or breach notification or ownership of data.
So that area, Bill, for the chief procurement officers, if they are the ones that have responsibility, are there good connection points then between the CIO's office to make sure that they do sync up on security and that they integrate with the other systems as need be, or are they coming in kind of the back door and the CIO's office not finding out about them?
Well, I think that's where the choice point is right there and where we can make a difference. And I think what we have to do is be more proactive in forcing that collaboration. I think the collaboration needs to take place not only between the IT folks, the procurement folks, but also your risk management folks, your AG's group, et cetera, to be able to consolidate all those requirements around what is necessary security, what can we live and live without in terms of conditions and liability associated with all the risk that we're going to take. I think we can develop, I'm almost thinking we can develop standard terms and conditions that maybe the state by law cannot get around, but then have another set of terms and conditions that actually can be processed through the negotiation process, where we can have some flexibility to negotiate those terms and conditions. I think that I see kind of a matrix in this, possibly. There are some things that are stated by law you can't get around. Venue in my state would be one thing, but in terms of other types of terms and conditions that seem to be the barrier right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think you're right. They are barriers, and I think there's a different perspective that takes place around terms and conditions. I mean, I think it's based on whether you're coming from the CIO side or you're coming from the Chief Procurement Officer side. I think the Chief Procurement Officer side likes to see terms and conditions that are kind of cookie cutter standard so that we got uniformity and we can make an award and we have certainty about it and it's easier and more efficient. But the rub comes in that for some of these new evolving technologies, and we're finding it certainly in public cloud, the service models under the cloud, actually trying to nail down a solid set of terms and conditions for a market that's evolving and hasn't yet kind of figured itself out is hugely challenging. And so, and the other problem that at least I think I see, and I'm curious to see if you've seen it on your side as well, is that sometimes we take those terms and conditions that we've used for the last 5 years in system integrator contracts and try to tag them into where we're going in the future, and they don't work. And that becomes a barrier. So is that getting sorted out?
I don't think there's any disagreement with the states here. The states are, from the procurement offices, are saying the standard terms and conditions they've used in the past won't work for IT contracting for the future, where we don't even know sometimes what that next frontier will be as far as what's going to be offered to us. So in the process of change, I mean, like I said, I worked for HP for 25 years. The issue with that, I think they were doing a lot of product development. This is no different than product development out of a tech company. We used to have design engineers would sit out and design the best, the neatest product in the world, toss it over the fence to the manufacturing guys and say, okay, go produce it, and also take 10% out of the cost. Absolutely could not do that, plus it extended the cycle times for product development to somewhere around 3 years. Well, the market changed, and everybody became more competitive from a supply chain standpoint. The lesson learned there was pull all those downstream folks, whether they were the upfront marketing folks, the supply chain folks, the manufacturers, manufacturing engineers, up front into the design cycle. This is no different. We need to pull the key players up into the design cycle for IT, for cloud procurement, to design the proper tool sets to be able to have flexibility.
Okay. Thank you, Bill. Any feedback from the panel before I go on to our next question, or?
Well, one thing to add.
Yeah,
I think when we talk about cloud procurement and T's and C's and those sorts of things, I think the one thing to keep in mind is that we talk about cloud like it's one thing, but it's actually an entire spectrum of different set of services. And so the T's and C's depend on exactly what you're buying, as well as what is the the data that's going to be housed by these systems. And so there's a lot of dimensions that come into the business decision around the leveraging a cloud service that will influence really the appropriate T's and C's. It's not really, you can't really have a single set that you can apply to everything.
Well, and then I guess kind of stealing Michael's thunder, right, something he'd mentioned earlier, they're also all sizes. I mean, I talked a little bit about what we do in Georgia for these larger sort of 20 million and up procurements, but when you're doing something pretty small, like say it's going to be software as a service and like $20,000 a year, you just can't go in expecting you're going to be able to negotiate all the T's and C's. They've got no time for that. They're just presenting you with their boilerplate contract. You might be able to get indemnification or jurisdiction change, but that's really about it. You're just going to have to either hold your nose and accept the terms or move on.
You know, there's another issue here. I think those are great comments. Sometimes there's this notion that we try to sort all this out with the procurement. I really think that, and I heard you say it in a meeting when we were working on terms and conditions in New Jersey, I think it was over a year ago, that you really need to understand your data. And in some cases, the trade-offs are such that you're not going to want to use a cloud procurement. But that planning up front really has to take place before you decide whether the public cloud is even the right thing for you or not. And if you haven't done that, you'll never solve that through the procurement process itself. You'll get an outcome that you're not going to be happy with. Would you agree with that, Bill? Yeah.
They turned it off in the back.
Is it off? There you go. I didn't know whether I got cut off automatically because I'm a procurement guy, or and I don't like being the first barrier on that list, by the way. So, no, I would agree with that. The planning element is the key part of all of this, and it's not a one-time thing.
Correct.
It's continual, and you got to get used to it because if the market's changing that fast, and there's opportunities for you to exploit those opportunities and to leverage those for the benefit of your states. This team needs to be continual. The looking at your contract vehicles and all of your terms and conditions and understanding where your strategies are, what your agencies want to do, where they're going forward, and the policies you're going to be setting in for those agencies is key. And the procurement folks need to be part of that team, because understanding that will help drive better contracting vehicles that you require, not just now, but for your future plans. So
Very good. Thanks, Bill. Don't go anywhere because we're not done, I'm sure, with procurement questions. But I want to go to Steve right now. Steve, I know you've been doing some procurement rework and modernization, gosh, since for a year and a half or a couple of years now in New Jersey. Where are you at with that?
Well, I've been chomping at the bit because learning about procurement in the state of New Jersey has been a challenge for me. But I got to tell you, when I put my chief instigator hat on and figured out that procurement folks were not the enemy. I mean, one of the things we really learned was, to Bill's point, they're chomping at the bit trying to figure out how they can help us because their lives are difficult, given the challenges with IT, the fact that they're not IT people. I think when we started, our dialogue about a year and a half ago, I think it was January 2014 when we first had our first summit meeting, we really had a great participation from procurement folks, from legal folks, from the client community, from the vendor community. It was really huge because one of the things that we recognized and realized very early on was we were starting with buying a wheel, and we're buying IT. And really the procurement folks were asking IT, how can we change this model so that we really had a better starting place? And that's where we started realizing that collaboration ×3 really had to happen. So we started instigating the process. So the conversation began with the private community willing to talk about what kind of things we need to do from terms and conditions perspective. We wanted to talk to our agency partners to find out what they're willing to accept and how they're willing to talk about what they wanted from technology, especially when it came from the cloud. And then, also talking to, our business partners, procurement, the legal staff, the AG's department. So it really was a significant effort to try and pull all these things together to figure out that we really could have a much better starting point. And as a part of that, we actually did end up coming up with a new level of starting point for terms and conditions that we've passed on to all of the states through the Center for Digital Government and their facilitation of this, and Dugan's help in that as well. And we passed that on, and we're really quickly followed up by NASCIO when they came back and said, we really like this. It's really a good place to begin now. You know, what can we do with this? And when they came back and said, you know, we're starting to consider negotiations for a new cloud contract for GIS, it would be really cool if we could put all this stuff together in one marketplace and have a new starting point for acquiring cloud services across the board in a more simplistic fashion. And my brain started going, saying, well, you know, every cloud contract that I've had to do in the last couple of years being in the state of New Jersey, it's been almost 2 years from the time we thought of it till the time we awarded it. And my goal is, if we can help enable our NASCIO partners, enable all of our client partners to figure out how to get cloud services in 2 months versus 2 years, that's a victory for everybody across the nation in government. And it's not just about state government, it's about local government, who are also chomping at the bit because they want it as well. So I think, you know, we've really crossed the barrier to make sure that, you know, we keep the collaboration going, we have these conversations. I know I take the opportunity, I have what I call vendor day, you know, once a month, and every conversation with every vendor that talks about a cloud component of their solution, I tell them, hey, there's these terms and conditions that we're now touting as best practices. Go look at them. If you weren't a participant in this, you need to know about this, because we're going to be looking for vendors who really want to partner and really start expediting, because it's a win-win. It's a win for us because we can get those services sooner. It's a win for them because they can get these things booked in their inventory fairly quickly. So I think it's a great starting point. I think there's a lot of people that are on board with it. It is going to change. It needs to be fluid. We've made it very clear that, you know, the next service, who knows what the next service is going to be? You know, monitoring as a service, business practices as a service. Who knows what it's going to be? But we need to make sure that we have some kind of starting point where the terms and conditions really talk about providing these things from a managed services perspective, whether it's in a cloud or otherwise. But we really need to make sure that we have a mechanism that gets us started a lot sooner rather than starting from square one.
It's a great point. You know, terms and conditions and procurement have been identified as a barrier for a long time as we moved into this, and moving into these cloud deployment models are still challenging. But I think through collaboration, actually starting with Delaware's terms and conditions, yes. Steve called a group together, invited the Center for Digital Government to come in and participate. Vendors, providers, and public CIOs, public officials from around the country came together and actually developed a better set of terms and conditions that would work at least under the public deployment model for those 3 service models. And then through the leadership in Utah, actually, Mark Van Orden is back here. He's got his enterprise architecture, Bob Woolley, working with the state of Utah to actually put a cooperative purchase out around that. There's an Information Communication Technology Advisory Council.
Yes.
A couple of you guys sat on that advisory council to try and resolve those issues and build off of that. So that collaboration, I think the important thing is here that cross-boundary collaboration is beginning to eliminate some of these policy barriers, partly through education and partly just through rolling up our sleeves and hard work, and in some respects building on what Bob's done over there with the NIST document as well. And that, I guess my sense is, we've heard collaboration a lot here, but that's part of how we eliminate some of these barriers, is figuring out who those policy owners are and making sure that they understand these impacts of technology, what technology can do, and help them make those changes as need be. So Michael D'Angelo, I think it was a year ago, I had the opportunity to sit at a session on agile contracting that Jim Smith was leading on a breakfast table here, and had a great discussion about how agile project delivery didn't have a complementary contracting model to follow up with it. And I had just a couple of weeks before, I think, talked to you about it, and I know you're doing some great things in partnership with your procurement office in Washington around agile contracting. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how's it going, and do you have some success out of it yet?
Yeah, it's going great.
Good.
Want me to elaborate?
Yeah, that'd be nice.
It's actually one of the fun parts of the job, and it's one of the things I think about when I come to work, and causes me to look forward to coming to work. The particular problem that we encountered is we have a strategy around driving agile practice within the state of Washington, mainly to go after lowering the risk of large projects, as well as producing citizen-facing value much sooner. You know, this data center story I was telling you a little bit earlier, part of that story is the fact that we can't make decisions and produce outcomes in a time frame that actually is, you know, keeps them relevant. And so, you know, this is part of the promise of Agile. But we had one particular instance where one of our agencies had a large $20 million project, and we basically told them they had to rewrite their investment plan and plan around an Agile approach. And they eventually got all on board and loved the idea, but then we quickly realized that we didn't actually have the infrastructure in the state to support an Agile project. We didn't have really the right procurement process to support it. How do you do selection and sourcing of vendors? How do you do because essentially in a traditional RFP, you have Appendix A or B or C or D that has 1,000 requirements, and vendors bid on what it would take to build this sort of unicorn at the end. And the reality is, in an Agile project, you just don't do that. You don't describe in detail the requirements. You simply set out a vision and maybe a high-level roadmap. And so if that's essentially what goes out there in RFP, well, how do you evaluate vendors? And then how do you do pricing and payment in a project that's executed agilely? You don't have these major milestones. And, after year one, we've got our design document, and that's somehow valuable, and we're going to go ahead and pay you for that. So it's what is the pricing methodology and the payment methodology? And so we've been working with the Attorney General's office and our state procurement office on developing standards or a different set of terms and conditions, some sample terms and conditions that agencies can use, some sample statements of work documents, as well as some examples of how you can RFP and do a competitive process for a project that's using an Agile methodology. And it's been a lot of fun, and really what's been exciting for me is the procurement office has been really open to the idea. It took a little while to get them to understand what Agile is and how this isn't really a contract that is time materials. You can actually do a performance-based contract in Agile, and they eventually got so on board with the idea that everyone in the IT procurement division has gone through. They're all Scrum Master certified now, and they have their Agile manifesto. It's actually called Procurement Manifesto, and their practice they refer to as XP, Extreme Procurement. And so they've drank the Kool-Aid, and it's really exciting to see that level of change in procurement. But that's the type of thing, that's the type of transformation that's needed in order to really drive the technology side of Agile.
So if anybody wanted to send some people out for training on this,
yes.
Would you be up for that?
If they wanted to actually do training on one particular in Agile, because I've got an idea.
What you're doing here. Yeah, what's your idea?
Yeah, sure, they can come out and see, but if the particular recommendation I made to the procurement was to procurement group is to not go to a standard Scrum Master class. Instead, go to this other class that I encountered. It's based in Washington, which is around extreme manufacturing. And this is an Agile. It's essentially taking Agile practices, lean practices, and extreme programming, and applying it to the manufacturing context. And the reason why that's important is it's applying those concepts to a non-software development business. And it's an exhilarating and very eye-opening type of experience, and that's what they went into. And essentially, you had procurement people working on cars, taking engines out of a car. That's instead of a Scrum Master class where you're working with pipe cleaners, you're taking a Scrum Master class where you're working on cars. And for those of you interested, you can just Google WikiSpeed, and you'll find sort of the class there.
So that's really great because you're breaking down barriers that by trying something new, by innovating and actually giving people a different way of looking at it and processing it. And I think that's got to be a takeaway here, because these new technologies and the business models that come from them require different ways of dealing with things. And so it's not surprising that we might actually execute against them or develop them by using a different way of processing.
Yeah,
So
the thing that's
really good.
fun for me is I love the dynamic where it really feels like we're starting to partner with procurement, number one. And number two, they feel like they're part of the cool kids club now. So it's really just a great, good feel and highly productive type of arrangement.
Really good. Thank you. So About a year and a half ago, I was at the NASCIO conference, and I was talking with my good friend David Behan, who is out here somewhere in the audience. And hi, David. And David was feeling pretty proud. Some of you may remember that. He had Gartner in, they'd done a major analysis, they'd done recommendations, and he was about to launch like 4, 5 different major IT initiatives. And he was pumped. And then about 6 months later, I ran into him in another conference, and he was saying, man, I gotta get the procurement office to get these things out. And he was a little bit nervous because the governor was expecting these to be delivered, and he had a lot of good stuff moving forward, but he had to deliver on that procurement process. And then we fast forward like another 6 or 7 months. David's got a procurement reform initiative going on in Michigan. So I've tried to get David to talk about this procurement reform initiative, and he's hired a great person who is really driving change in their organization, and they are so focused on it that he's not wanted to speak about it at all. But today he said, yeah, I might be able to talk about it a little bit. So David, can you give us kind of an update on where you're at and if I'm even halfway close to my lead-in for this for you? Stand up, David.
Good morning. Yeah, you're sort of close, Dugan. So, you know, I'm fortunate to be the director of the Department of Technology Management and Budget in Michigan. So all of state procurement falls under me. I don't know if that's a blessing or a curse, right? But, you know, when the governor asked me to be director, he said to me, well, we want you to fix procurement, right? Okay. So what we did is we brought in the former global procurement director for Ford Motor Company. And he came in, did a big assessment. And he said, here's all the things you need to do to become best in class. I will tell you some of the findings were quite alarming. One was that not one procurement official in the state of Michigan reported to the director of their agency. All right, that's crazy, right? If you think about it, right? So DTMB itself is a $1.2 billion organization, but like our Department of Human Services, our Department of Community Health, you know, they're $14 billion. In some of those areas, the procurement executive was 4 to 6 layers down. Now, I don't know about you, but if you were running your own company or your own business, you probably want to know how you're spending your dollars. So we then brought in, luck should have it, the guy who retired from Ford. His number 2 guy was retiring as well. So I remember he called me and said, if you can get Jeff Wellman, get him, because he'll be able to implement this for you. So we got Jeff Wellman. He's now on our team. He's the Director of Enterprise Procurement, and he is ushering through what we're trying to do with procurement reinvention. It's pretty simple. I mean, there's 5 things we're doing. You know, the first thing the governor did is after we sat down with the governor, said, Governor, here's the things we need to do to be best in class. He agreed to do an executive directive to all agencies that everyone needs to work together. There's going to be dotted lines from their procurement executive, to the chief procurement officer that works for me. As you can imagine, the agencies thought immediately that we were centralizing procurement, and they started to throw up red flags. But I'll tell you, when you have the executive sponsorship like we do with Governor Snyder, who came in and told everybody how important this was to him, and then he's putting out an executive directive, that's a directive. You're going to do it. To our surprise, most of the agencies have been at the table every other week, working on what we're doing and being very supportive. Because we said we were purchasing in silos, and so we can't do that anymore. So there's 5 goals that we sort of have. You know, one is creating a connected and integrated procurement team. I talked about the executives, the procurement executives get together every 2 weeks, and they talk about how they can procure goods and services together, right? That never happened in Michigan, ever. Second one is increased transparency through performance dashboards. We're absolutely counting everything we do, and we're making it public. Nothing like a little bit of public pressure to do things the right way. So we're doing that, and we're pretty successful with that. Implementing category management teams. That's probably the most important thing we're doing, is now we're going to category management. We never did that before. all purchases are not the same. So what are the categories? We have 4 different categories, and how are we going to address those, work with them, and what's the focus on them? You know, things when we're buying huge IT systems, a little different than buying, you know, the nuts and bolts that we buy every day. I mean, there's a difference there. We're starting to look at that now more seriously. We're having a strategic supplier, deploying strategic supplier management. I don't know about you, and I told this to with Jeff Wellman when he came in. I said, I have like 6 major IT partners. When I was CIO, I would sit down with them every quarter at least and go through what we're doing, how we're dealing, how we're working together. On the procurement side, we weren't doing that with other things besides IT. We weren't sitting down and talking to the major providers. One of the things that, you know, anyone can guess what state of Michigan purchases the most of. What do we spend the most money on? State of Michigan. Anyone got a guess?
Paper.
Huh?
Paper.
No. No paper. Huh? Roads. No, we need to spend more on roads. We haven't followed that. Alcohol. Liquor Commission, right? But are we sitting down and talking with them? Are we having a strategic discussion with them on how we purchase and what we purchase? And so we're doing that now. And then we're promoting data-driven decision-making. We're looking at best in class. We're coming and looking at other states. We're looking at other private organizations. How are we doing this? And how are we going to make this data-driven? Because my vision is one day is that, I don't know if you guys think this is true or not, procurement can become political sometimes, right? And so what I told the governor and others was I said, I literally want to one day just be able to put everything down on a piece of paper, put it next to him and say, here's the decision we made based on this data. If you think another decision should be made based on this data, tell us. But we think we can be very smart and strategic about it. I'll tell you, we have 126 things we need to do in the next 4 years to achieve our best in class. They wanted to make it 5 years, but I told them, let's scale that down to 4 for certain reasons, right? I'd like to see it. But we have 126 things we need to accomplish. We have I was just updated yesterday, we have 18% of those things done. We're tracking everything. We have a strategic, we call it our strategy room, in which we've invited lobbyists, our corporate partners, elected officials, agency directors, the public, to come in and view what we're doing and give us their opinion on how we're doing it. Being very transparent about it, because again, the budget in the state of Michigan is $54 billion. We were purchasing like 22 separate organizations, and that had to stop. So we're blessed in Michigan to have a governor who has put out an executive directive. He's watching it very closely. I have the senior staff come for the governor, the major senior staff come through the procurement room at least once every 3 months so that they can see the progress we're making and then also coach us on things we need to do better. So, Dugan, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's sort of what we're doing. I mean, if you think about some of the things we're doing, I mean, we're looking at, you know, I don't know how you guys purchase this stuff, but like, we're looking at things as simple as armored cars to go pick up the cash. And there's still some agencies out there that use cash, right? They have to. We were having multiple contracts with armored car folks, armored car companies, whatever they're called, right? That's ridiculous. For the state of Michigan, we should be negotiating a contract, getting the best price, and doing it as effectively and efficiently as possible. Fuel cards, right? Wireless, all those kind of things that everyone uses, we were purchasing them separately. And so now we're changing.
David, thank you very much. One of the things that David said about category purchasing, Bill said it as well, and I think somebody up here said it also, is making sure that the purchase is really tailored for what you're trying to buy. And when we're in technology and it's complicated, we have to understand that front-end planning, working with the providers at the front end to understand what it is we're trying to buy to make sure that it just doesn't get tossed over the wall to the procurement people, because they will really struggle if we don't have that figured out. So part of that barrier, part of the resolution of that barrier is actually working with them to better understand it. Michael, did you have a follow-up? Or?
Yeah, I do the first time.
Yeah, go ahead.
I wanted to stitch a couple of topics together in the vein of technology forcing policy changes. So we've talked about cloud a little bit. Now we're talking about procurement. There's one of my observations is that with this commoditization of cloud, what it's done is it's enabled a lot more innovation. It's enabled individuals and small companies to more easily develop actual decent solutions that are appropriate for government and create much lower entry barriers for them to come up with these solutions. But the way we engage those smaller businesses with our RFP processes, for example, procurement processes, our practices actually exclude implicitly small businesses because in order for them to engage in government, the process around procurement and around bidding and around just sort of going through that whole RFP, it's just something that would just shut them down. I mean, there are 2, 3, 4, 5 people, maybe 50 people, and larger businesses have entire divisions sometimes that respond to these RFPs, and so I think what that does for government is it creates an opportunity cost because we're not able to easily engage in those smaller businesses. And we seem to approach the procurement as if every problem is a $20 million problem, and often, you were talking about this earlier, Steve, often a lot of our problems are $20,000 problems, $50,000 problems, right? And in fact, that's probably the majority of our problems, quite honestly. So I think there's another sort of shift that we have to be willing to take as states around how we think about not only the procurement process itself, but also just sort of our standard general terms and conditions. And one experience I encountered is with a small startup we were doing business with. We told them we were going to start in January. They were all excited about it. They had a particular methodology that was unique and profound, so we really wanted them. But they needed to ramp up. They hired a few employees. And then we came in and said, well, actually, we had some internal delays. We won't be able to start till March. That's practically bankruptcy for these guys, right? But our contract our standard contracts is that we can cancel in time, we can do, we can change the start dates, whatever, and it's really up to the vendor to absorb that risk. That may be fine if you're talking about a big company. It is not okay when we're talking about a small company. So, and the city of Seattle alone has over 700 startups. So that's a huge opportunity that if governments want to tap into that, and we certainly do, we have to rethink how we do our standard, how we do business with small companies to attract them.
Yeah, it's think small in some cases could be a better solution. So this is kind of like a theme park up here. We're moving from Adventureland into Tomorrowland here. But before we leave Adventureland, I want to give anybody an opportunity to weigh in on procurement or ask a question. We've got some great experts in the room. Our panelist, David Behan. Well, yes, is this Carol?
Yeah. Carol Hinton from the IT Alliance for Public Sector. I really want to validate what Steve Nichols said about cloud procurement. I think we're at that inflection point today where if this is going to scale with cities and counties and water districts and municipalities, we've got to have terms and conditions that are flexible enough to accommodate all kinds of quickly procured cloud deployments. And I think that the state officials have a certain responsibility in this regard because it's not just your state that you're impacting, it is those other municipalities and jurisdictions in your state. So whatever state officials in the room can do to help make sure that cloud can be obtained and procured easily and quickly and fast is important.
Very good. Thank you, Carol. Any other questions on procurement? Right back here, I think. Hi, Aldona.
Aldona Valicenti. I'm the commissioner and CIO for my city and county, Lexington, Kentucky. By the way, across the street from NASCIO offices. Right. So I very often have a lot of input from Doug. But the point that I would like to make today is really, and it's very interesting listening to your discussion. Because first of all, we talk about cloud as sort of one huge thing. It's not. And if you look at the area where I work from a county and a city perspective, you really have to look at it from a solution. What solutions are we looking at? So let me talk about the 3 Ps. It's policy, planning, and procurement. And you talked about policy, and you also talked about planning, but they have to become before you do the procurement. And so when you talk about the cloud environment, you can talk about it from an enterprise, a very global perspective. What is your direction? But if you look at sort of the immediate needs of whether it's a city, a county, or a state, what do I do today to offer a solution? In many cases, you will have a set of applications or a set of solutions that are very specific to today's environment. And they have to play very well in the longer term procurement issues. So what are the things that you need to think about when you think about immediate solutions? The immediate solutions you want to talk about, first of all, what is the price? Is it something I can afford? Is it something that is going to fit into a longer global enterprise picture that you have? And ultimately, and you know, you've talked about this a lot in the last couple days, how does it fit into a security issue? And I would say that that may be even more important initially than talking about the price. So I wanted to provide you that sort of perspective from someone that is in a slightly different environment.
That's a perfect sum up of this segment. So thank you, Aldona. Very good. So now we move to Tomorrowland.
One more question.
I got to let them finish up here, but we could get back offline. So one thing we know about the future, at least based on everything I know about the past and what I know about NASCIO, is that 5 years from now, we're going to be back here sometime about this time of the year, somewhere near Washington, D.C., having a meeting talking about the issues that we've got. And one of the discussions will be about some new technology, maybe some of the same we've talked about today, and how we're dealing with policies to solve that technology. What are those challenges? What's that look like? So I want to quickly go down the row here, and we've only got less than 2 minutes. So I'll get your take on what that discussion is going to be like. What are we going to be talking about?
Well, I happen to be a lessons learned person, so in the next 5 years, I want to figure out all the lessons learned we learned from today through what happens in the next 5 years relative to managed services and cloud. So how are we learning? How are we improving? And have we figured out a way to continually make that improvement process? I think we'll also be talking about things that are currently out of scope. So, you know, coming to government, things have to be on the continental United States. Are we going to really have discussions about policies that will change, that will allow us to truly have offshore capabilities? We know they're cheaper. Are those dialogues going to occur? And, you know, kind of the fun one, I'm sitting there thinking about, you know, being a part of the NGAC committee and thinking about all the things they're doing with GIS and photography. I'm trying to figure out, okay, whose jurisdiction is the moon when we got somebody who puts a telescope up there that's taking pictures of us? Is it the place where it comes on board, or the place where the company is headquartered? So, you know, it really is about, you know, all the things that we talk about today and kind of figure out, you know, we're kind of stuck in the mud, but we got to figure out this thing is global, you know, where are we going to go?
Thanks, Steve. Michael.
I guess the cynic in me would say that we're going to talk about the same things we're talking about today. But I think the one thing that, you know, we talk about a little bit here and there and is on some of the questions labeled as big data. I don't particularly like that term, but I think the data and information that we collect is going to change. And really what's changing about it is how we collect it as well as the type of information. And I think that's going to be part of, in my mind, the part of what's happening in the technology is the increasing commoditization of it, and we still kind of focus around infrastructure, and that's starting to wane a bit. We're focusing around applications. It's shifting to a focus around applications. I think ultimately we'll get to a point, and maybe it's 5, maybe it's 10 years, where we're actually focusing on the data, and the applications and the infrastructure is really irrelevant. The challenge then becomes an issue of, well, one, how do we manage the data, how's the data being used, and the privacy concerns for that data. So I think the notion of sensors everywhere and the type of data and the volume of it is going to be sort of the next major generation of policy.
So I'm going to skip over you for now, Steve, and go to Robert. Robert, what's NIST looking at next?
Okay, so outside of cloud, one of the big thrusts at NIST is the Internet of Things. We have a national size program at NIST. We're in the middle of developing smart cities programs. I think that's with 7 cities in different technological suppliers throughout the U.S. that they're testing smaller cities, larger cities. I think New York is actually one of them. They have a big smart cities project up there. As far as an additional technology spin, I think one of the things that we're going to be looking at is the intercloud, which is the cloud of clouds. So in essence, federated clouds, and how will cloud services be procured in the future? I saw a Gartner report that said in about 5 years, 80% of all cloud services are going to be procured by other clouds. So you don't want the messy human in the loop when you're doing that type of stuff. So how are we going to work on ways to do automatic or automated SLAs or automated service level agreements and handshakes between other clouds so we can move faster and get more stuff?
Let me do a quick follow-up. You mentioned performance metrics around procurement. And I know that's past the comment stage, but how would we find out about that and engage in that?
Sure. Okay, so it's performance metrics on cloud services, and you can Google NIST SP 500-307. That's our draft document that we just released on, which describes a model of how to develop cloud service metrics. In a nutshell, when you're developing your requirements, you have a set of technical requirements, you have a set of business requirements. In essence, at the end of the day, when you want to talk with your vendor, you want to make sure that you have metrics that directly translate back to those requirements. So.
Very good. Steve, I'm going to give you a wrap-up on
Okay.
this. So what are we talking about 5 years
So
from now?
we talked about a lot of, or sort of polled for a lot of disruptive technologies, but I think the one that causes sort of the most challenges all the way around for central IT organizations is cloud. So I think in 5 years, we'll still be talking about cloud. I think we'll have seen some horror stories play out by then where we're going to see a new kind of like data breach where people are going to just lose their data because they're going to forget to pay the bill, right? You know, just because knowledge transfer, right? And it's going to get turned off and they're just going to lose data. I think that we're also going to see, because right now it's still pretty frothy, we're going to see vendors exiting the market or going bankrupt. And since we're all signing up in every cloud contract I've seen for 30-day mutual termination for convenience clauses, we're going to see some horror stories where states are going to have to move a workload in less than 30 days and it's not going to go well. And I think that we're also all going to have, like, say, 50% of our workloads in the cloud. So the track we're going to be specifically going to that'll be standing room only will be all about how to consolidate and rationalize the cloud workloads. Maybe not necessarily back into your data center, but into a smaller number of cloud providers, or at least assigning the contracts back into the central IT organization and harmonizing all the terms and conditions.
Thank you, Steve. We're just about out of time, so we're going to leave it here. Please thank Scott Pattison, Bill Burns, David Behan for their contributions today. Thanks for being here and sharing your perspective. I'd like to thank our panelists. Great working with you, Steve Emanuel, Michael D'Angelo, Steve Nichols, Robert Byrne. Thank you so much.